Femininity by Susan Brownmiller. Chapter 5. Skin. During a season of public exposure, when I traveled the country in leaps and bounds, one pale, imperceptible hair on my chin, lighter than an eyelash and less significant than a freckle, abruptly multiplied into two, then four, sturdy dark bristles that thrust themselves forward with pushy vigor. This uninvited quartet grew more swiftly than any hair that had ever been mine. Offended, I wiped the slate clean with a razor. 2 days later, the stubble reappeared. Stubble! Only men had stubble on their chins. I was growing whiskers. One night I dreamed that a stiff black mustache had sprouted above my articulate mouth, a dream so frightening that I awoke in a panic. In the neutral light of a hotel mirror, I contemplated my mortification. Were the hairs on my chin a warning or a retribution? Had my unholy ambition tapped some dormant source of testosterone within my system? Had I unlocked a reserve tank of hormonal assertion to which only men were allowed the key? Whatever the cause, I knew with certainty that I would not be packing a razor, that I would now be packing a razor whenever I traveled, and that I would feel for the trace of coarse hair in odd moments, just as men absently strokes his chin for sign of a 5 o'clock shadow. Some months later, I furtively visited an electrologist. She peered through a magnifying glass and pronounced her judgment, "It's a mole." A mole is a great relief when a woman fears that her drive for success has sprouted whiskers. Beyond the many diseases of the skin itself, from psoriasis to venereal infection, a change in complexion may indicate a threat to life. There is the ashen face of a person in shock, the blue coloration of cardiac failure, the jaundiced hue of a liver infection, the pigmented moles of cancerous melanoma. A ravaged, pitted skin marks the survivor of a virulent epidemic smallpox that decimated populations and affected the course of world history. Skin also functions as a means of social communication. Newborn babies that are not picked up and held may die. A rash or an outbreak of pimples can indicate an emotional upset or an allergic reaction. Profuse sweating and strong odor are common responses to stress. Hairiness that is not normal for one ethnic group may be aesthetically offensive to another. Job and housing discrimination on the basis of skin color has been codified by private covenant and public law. A 4-year study of skin disease in the United States reported the following. Nearly 1/3 of all Americans suffer from some sort of skin condition. Pathology increases with age, and more males than females are subject to major and minor disorders for reasons of heredity and hormones. Yet to judge from the multi-billion-dollar cosmetic industry, the persistent rash of books on skincare, and the popularity of dermatologists, plastic surgeons, and skin clinics that cater to the problems of beauty and aging, improving the texture of skin and quality of the skin is a basic feminine obligation, while for men, it remains an optional or irrelevant concern. Fair skin of the sort that poets have praised, pale beauty, white shoulders, a complexion of peaches and cream, is more than a matter of health and cleanliness. Although the anxious regard for a clear complexion, found in descriptive reports sent to kings in search of a royal wife, no doubt was inspired by fear of the pox and its deadly contagion. Beautiful skin, sweet-smelling, lily-white, rosy-cheeked, soft and dewy and free of blemish, is a sentimental attribute of virginal innocence and aristocratic fragility, historically defined by that complex mixture of exaggerated anatomical difference, evidence of a sheltered life, and male sexual preference for a serene young female in mint condition. The Princess and the Pea, by Hans Christian Andersen, tells of the wonderful good fortune that befalls a bedraggled young girl who knocks on the door of a castle during a rainstorm. She is shown to a bed piled high with 20 mattresses stuffed with feathers, under which the queen has placed a single pea. In the morning, the girl confesses to have spent a sleepless night. Her entire body is black and blue, and without wishing to offend her hosts, she thinks she must have been lying on something hard. The king and queen are filled with joy. They have found a proper wife for their son at last. For, quote, Nobody but a real princess could have such delicate skin. End quote. As told by the Brothers Grimm, the story of Snow White is similarly instructive. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all? The queen has grown accustomed to a reassuring answer. You, the mirror always replied, you are the fairest of them all, until that terrible day when the mirror spoke the truth. Snow White is fairer than you. This happens predictably to aging queens. They are no match for dewy skinned challengers. The mirror does not lie, and emollients, moisturizers, and wands of magic color are insufficient measures for dealing with crow's feet around the eyes, furrows on the brow, enlarged pores, brown spots, and loss of elasticity. For the young as well as the old, advertisements for commercial skincare preparations and advice columns in the women's magazines spell out an impossible prescription. Clear, fresh, firm, and useful. Soft and smooth in texture like a baby's, lighter in color than a man's. No freckles, no pimples, no blackheads, no wrinkles, no frown lines, no dryness, no sag. No oily condition, no sallow complexion, no glisten and shine of perspiration, no bags or shadows under the eyes, no scars, no birthmarks, no pits, no pockmarks. No bulging blue veins, no broken red capillaries, no liver spots, no white spots, no open pores, no blotches. No unsightly facial hair, no hair on the legs and other prescribed places. No crepey neck, no scaly calloused heels, no coarse rough elbows, no dishpan hands. In short, a skin that shows no sign of physical maturity, hard work, aggravation, exhaustion, hormonal changes, the effects of pregnancy, or the normal wear and tear of daily life. Minor skin troubles are a fact of life for more men than women, but they are rarely a disqualifying factor in terms of sexual appeal. A boy may suffer acute social mortification from a severe case of blackheads and pimples, but the pits and scars of his youthful acne may be perceived as ruggedly masculine when he reaches maturity. A girl will have no such respite. She will pathetically try to hide her quote unquote angry eruptions under a thick cover of makeup that is guaranteed to aggravate her condition and later on may become an eager candidate for medical dermabrasion. Similarly, the deep furrows that signify concentration, sensitivity, and an interesting experience in a man of middle years, are the subject of massive emergency pressure at their first sign of appearance in a woman who embarks on her desperate maintenance program of moisturizers, facial masks, wrinkle creams, and perhaps some subcutaneous injections of silicone or collagen and a facelift. In a culture that glorifies youth, men are hardly immune to the anguish of aging, but they have yet to resort, in large numbers, to the illusory feminine procedures for stopping the clock, even as they continue to judge women by the standards they would not be foolish enough to apply to themselves. Belief that a woman's skin should be lighter and more perfectly smooth than a man's has had a tenacious hold on aesthetic convention. A dark light palette to indicate sex differences was used for ancient Egyptian wall paintings. Yellow pigment was applied to female bodies, and reddish brown was the standard color for males. A flawless, shell pink body was the romantic convention for female nudes in Western art, while earthier flesh tones portrayed the masculine complexion. To this day, theatrical makeup remains divided into a range of shades by sex. In biological fact, there is no natural difference in skin color between men and women. Darker skin has a greater concentration of the pigment melanin in the epidermis, and while melanin has an obvious genetic correlation with race, a connection with gender does not exist. A comparative study of skin tones in a sample population in Michigan reported that men did appear to be somewhat darker about the chest area than women, but concluded in its wisdom that men often worked or sunbathed without a shirt while women did not. Spending more of the day out of doors obviously contributed to the artistic convention of the quote unquote naturally darker male, but even more significant to the evolving values of femininity was the earnest conviction that persons of royal heritage possessed a lighter, more delicate skin than commoners. This flesh tone convention of Middle Ages and the Renaissance can be seen in Spanish and Venetian art, in the brilliant portraits of nobility and their servants by Gora, Pietro Longhi, Pietro Longhi, where a pale, glowing skin visually directs the eye to the people of importance, an artist's trick of great technical merit. An elitist, sorry, an elitist approach to skin color was not restricted to the painted canvas. In real life, the aristocrat's fair complexion was a lofty sign of noble lineage and gentle breeding, as opposed to the dim, thick-skinned lower orders, the swarthy peasants who labored under the sun. Quote-unquote sunburnt carried the meaning of rude and uncouth, as quote-unquote redneck does today. Ladies and gentlemen powdered their faces, and often their hair, to achieve the starchy whiteness that symbolized their elevated station. To preserve or encourage a fine, noble pallor complexions, masks of noble pallor, complexion masks of paper and cloth were worn out of doors to protect their face from the rays of sun, while a creamed, perfumed glove protected the fair hand from roughness and chapping. For cases where a dusting of white lead powder could not disguise certain misfortunes of birth, such as ruddiness, freckles, or an olive complexion, there were recipes for blanching the skin with a glaze of egg white, tartar, lemon juice, mercury, and the sap of the birch. Elizabeth of England was so intent on preserving her whiteness, a quality she shared with her father, Henry VIII, that in her old age she painted blue veins on her royal forehead to promote the illusion of translucent splendor. Parasols and sunbonnets were standard regalia for the would-be ladies of the American colonies who sought to emulate the upper-class customs of England and France, and both sexes in the upper reaches of society powdered their hands and their hair and their faces. It is difficult to pinpoint the precise moment when men abandoned whiteness as a mark of quality. The French and Industrial Revolutions were urgent catalysts in the decline of extravagant dress and cosmetics as symbols of masculine power. But by the late 19th century, a fair, light skin was exclusively and enviously feminine. Note: in the 20th century, pale skin remains a proud symbol of lofty aims and spiritual masculinity in Orthodox Jewish communities, which still value the pallid, pasty-faced Talmudic scholar above other men. End note. If an in quote-unquote interesting pallor could not be achieved by powder, tight lacing, and strict avoidance of the sun, some desperate beauties resorted to eating small quantities of arsenic, a cause of alarm in the medical journals. Associating pale skin with aristocratic refinement was not restricted to white-skinned people. Ivan Morris records in The World of the Shining Prince that among the nobility of feudal Japan, the physical ideal was a round, white face and a heavily perfumed body, removed in countenance and scent from the sweaty, sun-scorched laborers of the rice fields. Quote, in paintings of gentlemen and ladies of the court, it was conventional that people of higher rank had fairer faces. Since nature could not always be relied on to respect these distinctions, generous amounts of powder were used in order to produce the fitting degree of pallor. End quote. The sun parasol, that is such a charming fixture of Japanese art, was used by both sexes, and as late as this century, long after upper-class men had given up the convention for themselves, Japanese peasant women covered their faces when they worked in the fields to preserve a light complexion, a custom they shared across continents and cultural barriers with identically swathed peasant women in Italy and France. There are many poetic terms of praise in India for the light-skinned woman, who is highly valued for her beauty, an aristocratic tradition that predates British rule, but the emphasis on light-skinned feminine beauty among American blacks has been one of the bitter fruits of racism, the imposition of one culture's values on another. In slaveholding America, within one generation, light color became a pragmatic asset, as it subsequently did for the Cubans and Puerto Ricans, since looking quote unquote more white was a passport to economic and social mobility. Black aristocracy in Harlem and elsewhere had always been light. However, for women, quote unquote bright skinned or quote unquote high yaller, those semi contemptuous, semi approving Southern terms, meant being singled out for sexual attention, a boon or a misery depending on circumstance. But the passport of light skin was held by only a few. For the majority of black women in America, a general negation of good feelings about their dark looks found expression in lyrics. Quote, what did I do to you so black and blue? Quote unquote, all the fellers go for the high yellers. Billboard and magazine advertisements in the 1940s and 50s for Nadinola and other skin lighteners held out the romantic promise, quote unquote, now you can be lighter than he. In the same way that Adler elevated shoes assured men, quote unquote, now you can be taller than she. According to Michelle Wallace, author of Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman, despite attempts by cultural nationalists in recent years to extol the image of a dark African queen, and despite the success of a few dark skinned actresses, models, and singers in white America, a light skinned beauty remains the ideal. My own claim to beauty, I learned at college, was an unusually pale skin which bruised easily and did not tan, presenting a striking contrast to my dark hair and darker disposition and wardrobe. To my romantic satisfaction, I was known on campus as quote unquote the white skinned girl, an extraordinary attribute at an Ivy League school of 10,000 students and many blondes. My tendency to bruise, a perpetual crisis in childhood whenever I came home from the playground, was elevated, largely by me, to an emblem of fragile sensitivity of the sort that marks a sisterhood of heroines in sentimental novels, and my whiter than white complexion was compared favorably by some clever boyfriends to the Spanish royalty painted by Goya and to the stark sophisticated models in the black and white pages of Vogue. Needless to say, I gloried in my delicate coloration, expecting the compliments to continue over the years as a matter of course. Sadly for my femininity quotient, my porcelain complexion, my alabaster loveliness, darkened with time to an average color. In Pride and Prejudice, the jealous Miss Bingley has scoffed at Elizabeth Bennet for her coarse, brown complexion, while the loyal Darcy staunchly defended his lady love's right to the summer tan she had inadvertently acquired on walks in the country. Lively, athletic Elizabeth was a woman ahead of her times. It wasn't until the 1920s that the rich overcame their historic aversion to the sun's effects and took up the pastime of soaking up the summer rays at their seaside resorts and watering spas. The sybaritic novelty of toasting to perfection on the Riviera or lying on the beach blanket at the Lido was strictly for the summer months, and the women's magazines of that era still featured advertisements for skin whiteners and freckle creams to improve the feminine complexion. By the 1960s, however, the superior femininity of lily white skin had become an outdated concept, replaced by the healthful vision of the golden California girl and the tawny glow of the international jet set who followed the sun, never fully unpacking their Gucci bags. An expensively acquired Caribbean tan became an enviable winter status symbol when compared to a dull office pallor. Quick to capitalize on middle class aspirations, cosmetic companies began to feature tawny makeup and rosy blushes for the winter season to a secretary or file clerk So a secretary or file clerk could look as though she'd been somewhere interesting, at least in her imagination. But just when a ruddy complexion was no longer the mark of a lower class laborer or the exclusive dominion of lean, hard masculine strength, dermatologists sounded the warning. The alarms were especially loud in Vogue and other women's magazines that nothing ages Caucasian skin more rapidly and more irreversibly than prolonged exposure to the sun. If large numbers of women became convinced that the leathery, wrinkled look of a sea captain or skin cancer may be in store for them rather than a permanent extension of a sunny vacation, we may see a reemergence of the alabaster lady who eschews the noonday sun, although PABA lotions and sunblockers may deter a wholesale return to the romance of the parasol and bonnet. Because of their higher levels of androgen, more men than women suffer from acne, especially in its severest forms, but the sheer panic a woman goes through at the eruption of a single pimple has led to a common assumption that breaking out is a female problem. It is, but the problem is strictly social in origin, for a solitary pimple standing in wretched bas relief on a woman's cheek is a total repudiation of the ideally flawless feminine complexion. That a woman's skin often erupts on a monthly cycle because of increased androgen and lower estrogen at those times has contributed to the belief that female hormones are somehow to blame. Estrogen actually has a calming effect on the skin because it reduces oil gland production, as many women on birth control pills have discovered. But tinkering with the body's natural hormone levels can have unpleasant permanent effects on the complexion, as women on the pill have also discovered to their feminine chagrin. Giant freckles on the face and chest, known medically as melasma or cloasma, have appeared in perhaps as many as 30% of all women who have taken birth control pills for long periods of time. As with blood clots, the pigmentation was an unexpected side effect about which they were given no advance medical warning. Despite the old canard that a woman never looks better than when she's pregnant, dramatic changes in estrogen and progesterone levels during pregnancy commonly cause a blotchy pigmentation on the face and stomach, freckling, darkening of the nipples and areola, varicose veins, unwanted face and body hair, mild balding, inflamed gums, stretch marks, itching, swelling, and other assorted skin afflictions. Some of these side effects disappear in time, and some, like stretch marks, do not, despite cocoa butter, exercise, massage, or whatever. Pregnancy and childbirth are prime, incontrovertible expressions of biological femaleness, and the effects on the skin are so nearly universal that they cannot be considered abnormal, even though, in medical terms, they may be considered adverse. In societal terms, however, they are a feminine misfortune, signs of a used and slightly worn body, a negation of the youthful, unblemished ideal. I would like to meet the woman who is proud of her stretch marks as the sign of a job well done. Pimples and stretch marks are trivial concerns compared to the pitted, pocked skin that permanently disfigures the survivors of epidemic smallpox, the periodic scourge of Europe and the United States, until Jennerian vaccination brought it under control in the 19th century. To honor a lady by praising her milkmaid's complexion was no mere poetic fantasy, for the milkmaid, as Edward Jenner discovered, had been immunized by catching a mild form of the pox from her cows. Smallpox, like syphilis, the great pox, was no respecter of class. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, a controversial figure in 18th century England for her presumptuous forays into the masculine field of writing, had survived the disease in childhood. She was broadly ridiculed by Horace Walpole and others for her excessive use of cosmetics, her thick and artless facial plaster. Whether or not the ridicule was justified, heavy makeup to cover her pox was one of Lady Mary's passions. Her letters from Turkey, a rare account of life within the harem, are filled with admiration for the concubine's adept ways with jars of cream and pots of color, and she brought home many samples. Always the first to try something new, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu introduced the smallpox inoculation to England. Her son was the first to receive the serum. Thick enamel was one contemporary solution to the aesthetic problem of a pockmarked skin. Another was the Parisian fashion called les mouches, patching the face with little black stars and crescents of velvet or paper to hide the disfiguring pits. The contagion of patching spread among ladies and dandified gentlemen even faster than the pox. But while two or three black spots charmingly affixed to the cheek, chin, or forehead were admired, an evening at the theatre afforded the amusement of counting patches on those who were more intent on camouflage than fashion. No other period in history has been so heavily made up as the 18th century, concludes Fania Gunn in her History of Cosmetics, The Artificial Face. Hair on the face, or any part of the facial topography, beyond the eyebrows and lashes, is definitely off limits to the feminine woman. Bearded women have been exhibited as sideshow freaks in the circus, where they are jokes for the rubes on summer evenings. Quote, "You should be a woman, and yet your beard forbids me to interpret you as so." End quote. With this famous challenge, Banquo addresses the three witches in Macbeth. While a student at Oxford after the First World War and an active participant in militant feminist campaigns, the English writer Vera Brittain nearly suffered a breakdown convinced she was growing a witch like beard. At the beginning of the new feminist movement, when many of us rebelled for the first time in our lives against artificial beauty from girdles to lipstick, I saw the emergence of several bearded women. Peach fuzz, really, not the sort of stuff that could devolve into a patriarch's full beard, but nonetheless a ground cover of surprising, dense growth. I was shocked and wished they would do something about it, continue to do whatever it was they had been doing. Depilatory creams, strip wax, electrolysis, plucking, bleaching, the daily shave. Women with hair on their faces were asking for support, but a lifetime of social conditioning ordained my aesthetic aversion. A beard is defined as a male secondary sex characteristic because it arrives at puberty, separating the men from the boys and the males from the females in Mother Nature's perfect order, which is never so perfect and never so orderly. Men and women within a family, race, or ethnic group have a fairly equal number of hair follicles on cheek, chin, and upper lip, but a rush of androgens in adolescence makes the difference in male growth. But not the entire difference, for hairiness is also an inherited characteristic. Whites are usually more hairy than blacks. Mediterranean, Celtic, and Arab populations are usually more hairy than other whites. American Indians and Asians are the least hairy of all. This genetic pattern holds true for body hair as well as hair on the face, and for women as well as men, and has nothing to do with androgen levels. In War and Peace, the little Princess Bolkonskaya, an acknowledged beauty and the toast of St. Petersburg, was was famous, as Tolstoy described her, for the downy hair on her upper lip. White women are endowed genetically with more facial hair than the modern Western aesthetic would care to admit. Hair on the chin and upper lip has a statistical frequency of 10 to 28%, depending on ethnic origin, compared to zero incidence for Japanese women. Although a hormonal imbalance may be the cause in a small number of cases, too much androgen or oversensitivity to androgen can turn a smooth-cheeked woman into a distressfully hirsute. Excessive hair is medically defined as, quote, more hair than is cosmetically acceptable to a woman living in a certain culture, end quote. Facial hair in American women is socially defined as unpleasantly masculine in appearance and is psychologically feared as abnormal. Quite understandably, the beard has not been significant in the mythology of the American Indian or in African cultures. By contrast, Western and Middle Eastern tradition is full of beards and their weighty importance. The mighty pharaohs, including Queen Hatshepsut, the obelisk builder, come down to us in monumental portraits wearing false, formal beards, and it is difficult to visualize Moses or God the Father without their patriarchal growth. Hairs from the chin of the Prophet Muhammad are celebrated as holy relics in Muslim shrines. One of the more bemusing aspects of the male biased and white biased anthropology has been an obsession with beards and their evolutionary importance to male domination. Identifying their interests, or the hair on their chins with the whiskers on the male baboon and the glorious mane on the lion, some impressionable men have asserted that by presenting a stern and fearful visage, the bearded male makes a better hunter and fighter. When George Shaler reported from the Serengeti in 1969 that the female lion did 90% of the hunting, that took some of the starch out of the king of the beasts and his magnificent mane. Nowadays, one mostly reads about the glorious silverback mane on the male gorilla, who is a leaf eater anyway. Speculation as to why females are beardless has also crept into anthropological doctrine. One imaginative authority has offered the thought that this quote unquote evolutionary adaptation took place because it was nicer for the baby to cuddle up to a hairless cheek. Whatever the advantages or disadvantages to having a beard, in people of bearded stock, the ability to grow facial hair is a proud sign of normal development and virility in men, even if they choose to shave every day, and a cause for deep social alarm and insecurity in women, upon whom aesthetic tradition imposes a childlike state of hairlessness that is truly the unnatural condition. Masculine appearance may fluctuate from clean shaven to full mustache and beard, but women consistently winnow away the scant amount of facial hair allotted by nature to establish a feminine look, even further removed from the emblematic hairiness of men. A demure and placid feminine expression was achieved in the Middle Ages by totally obliterating the eyebrows and plucking an inch of hair from the temples and nape of the neck to create an oval face of pious chastity that is seen in the works of Memling, Pisanello, van der Weyden, Van Eyck, and others. There has rarely been an image in which the eyebrow tweezer has not been a necessary feminine aid, either to clean up a scraggly line or to compose a thin arch of perpetual serenity and pleasant surprise. Women have tampered with their eyebrows in practically every permutation of ideal beauty, even today, when the thick dark brows of Brooke Shields are considered chic. One could argue that tweezering the brows is merely the feminine equivalent of masculine face design vis-a-vis the mustache and beard, but a plucked brow that remains only a faint reference to the muscle that lies underneath it functions to reduce the intensity of facial expression. Unruly eyebrows that are thinned to a delicate arch and spaced wider apart than nature intended can effectively turn a bold, forthright stare into a pampered, shy glance that is coyly flirtatious. Tweezed brows can transform a knitted furrow of effort and concentration into a mild, even gaze of inscrutable blankness. They can dilute the severity of negative thought into a tremulous flicker that might be mistaken for timid approval. For these artful reasons, the tweezer remains a keystone of feminine disguise and good grooming. Reduction of body hair follows reduction of facial hair. For here again, there is no absolute difference in the distinction between the sexes. There is only a difference in the amount or degree. Males and females grow a coarser type of hair at puberty because of target tissue sensitivity to the normal amounts of androgen we routinely produce. As with hair on the face, the gradation is significant enough to be called sexually dimorphic, like muscularity and height. Body hair on men, usually, is more profuse and it covers a wider area, and that is a basic hormonal fact. Body hair on women is subjected to the closest aesthetic scrutiny, and most normal manifestations are thought to be at odds with feminine appeal. According to an electrologist's chart, there are 9 common areas where the presence of hair may be cosmetically superfluous or indelicately offensive on a woman's body: underarm, lower back, between the breasts, around the nipples, lower arm, abdomen, pubic zone, thigh, and leg. Since femininity, in all respects, is a matter of containment, a woman whose hair exceeds the aesthetic limits of her culture probably will employ some depilatory procedure to bring her body into line. I remember when the fine downy hair on my legs began to darken over a summer vacation. I was startled and not altogether pleased with what was happening, but I knew what to do: remove it. I purloined a razor and hurriedly shaved the emergent fuzz off my legs as fast as it appeared, even faster, so entranced was I with this grown up rite of passage, and begged my mother for a pair of nylon stockings. Smooth shaved legs were sexy. Now I could be a pin-up girl, Betty Grable. The hair under my arms got scraped away too, even though that hurt, and putting on deodorant, a finishing touch of the careful procedure, caused a nasty sting. Newly vigilant, I embarked on the classic American feminine mopping up operation that soon ceased to be an exciting ritual of glamour and became a time consuming, repetitive chore very similar to housework. No matter how well I performed the required scouring, within a few days the telltale signs of embarrassing neglect showed through. During the many years I dutifully trimmed and clipped my natural landscape, I couldn't help but feel that the insistent new growth was some sort of repudiation of my work, and also that the work itself was patently hypocritical, an elaborate ruse to pretend that the skin on my legs was naturally smooth, and that no dark shadow ever fell across my pale underarm. If the advice had to be wiped out on sight, if the evidence had to be wiped out on sight, a proper female body shouldn't be growing this stuff at all. Why did I need to lock myself in an aesthetic convention that denied my physical reality? There was nothing wrong or unnatural about the hair that grew back in places where I tried to will it away. It had a perfect biological right to be there. It had a perfect female right to be there. What it did not have, however, was a feminine right. Thought to be a vestigial remnant left over from a time when humans, or our precursors, were completely furry, body hair in modern times has lost whatever protective function it once may have had. Since the coarse patches that appear under the arms and about the genitals are synchronized hormonally to puberty, they boldly signify sexual maturation and once may have served as a mating signal. J. M. Tanner, a British authority on anatomical development, has theorized that the so called sexual hair may have provided a handy clutch for an infant when carried under its mother's body, as apes and monkeys carry their young. Perhaps. We know for a fact that pubic and underarm patches require only a small amount of androgen at adolescence, and all normal adults have some hair in these places, even the least hairy ethnic groups, whose leg hair, especially on women, is sparse. We also know that body hair in both sexes diminishes with age, while hair on the face increases. Tanner's intriguing theory of the parental function of body hair, which I'll admit a fondness for, is at odds with the other anthropological speculations which fixates on the relative hairlessness of females in comparison to males. Darwin once claimed, and others continue to echo in abysmal ignorance of modern endocrines research, that hairless skin in females has been an evolutionary end product of sexual selection because of its keen attractiveness to males. In other words, men preferred to mate with less hairy females and choose them over the hairier types, and eventually hairlessness became a genetic norm. Darwin was surely a genius, but he was wrong about many things, and why females have less hair than males was one of them. Yet this specious teleological reasoning lives on. In The Naked Ape, Desmond Morris proposes that females may have lost their body hair, quote unquote, to make sex sexier, by revealing their shapely outlines and by enhancing the gratification of touch, ultimately tightening the pair bond by intensifying copulatory rewards. We don't require a Charles Darwin or a Desmond Morris to tell us that men may be put off by a hairy woman. Centuries before these gentlemen gave us a clue to their own personal preference. Ovid, the love poet, had jauntily compared the hair on a woman's legs and under her arms to that of a rude goat. As it happens, hairlessness in newborn babies and puppies does look innocent, vulnerable, and non threatening, while unkept hairiness in werewolves, witches, barbarians, and madmen appear uncontrolled and fierce. The animal like aspect of body hair, to a very refined sensibility, and the fact that women under detention were denied their razors, undoubtedly led a pioneer criminologist of the 19th century named Cesare Lombroso to propose that the body type of the female offender was characteristically hirsute. A similar claim was made for female schizophrenics, nymphomaniacs, and prostitutes. Under these harebrained theories, Mediterranean women ranked high in all categories: oversexed, violent, and mentally unstable. The biological truth that males are hairier than females, and that a lack of hair is sometimes connected with faulty maturation, gives credence to the myth that vigorous growth, especially on the chest, is evidence in men of superior virility and courage. Phrases like, quote unquote, that'll put hair on your chest, are not without effect, and many a smooth chested teenage boy has been hauled off to a doctor by his over anxious parents. Genetic propensity, however, does not unfailingly cooperate with cultural myth. Given the ethnic diversity and individual differences among American men, a smooth or hairy chest is evidence of nothing at all. As for women, the presence of hair around the nipples is also related to ethnic stock. A study conducted in Wales reported an incidence of 17%. This would be high for other ethnic groupings. But all prevailing images of the beautiful, bountiful breast are so faultlessly smooth that a quote unquote normal feminine appearance cannot tolerate the existence of a solitary speck. Ballet dancers of both sexes customarily shave their body hair and wear flesh colored tights, for hair obscures and detracts from the purity of shape and design. Black net stockings and pink tights were essential to the suggestive can costume in an age when women did not shave their legs and were fleshier than today. Without the mesmerizing apparition of near nudity in synchronized motion, that would also thanks to the tights, there would also be no jiggle in the thighs. The high kicking chorus line would never have gotten off the ground. To think of Swan Lake, a Busby Berkeley routine of or the Rockettes precision drill with leg hair is a ludicrous notion. When a leg is shaggy, who can tell if the knee is dimpled, the calf is shapely, or the ankle well turned? Unshaven it remains, a utilitarian limb, not a heightened artistic vision of feminine flesh on erotic display. Leg hair was not a problem to American women before the 1920s because the legs of most women were never on public view. When a change in attitude toward recreation, fashion, and female emancipation during the prosperous post jazz age made it socially acceptable for women of all ages and classes to expose their limbs, modesty regarding the propriety of showing legs was transformed with astonishing rapidity into a dainty self consciousness regarding quote unquote unsightly hair. As depilatory advertisements reminded their audiences in the women's magazines, the classic Greek ideal of feminine beauty appeared hairless in sculptured white marble. More to the point, perhaps the showgirl's smooth, leggy glamour, the sleek, hairless models in the fashion illustrations, and the changing rules of etiquette at the beach had upped the ante of feminine competition. Before the Great War, voluminous, skirted, and bloomered bathing costumes for ladies desirous of a refreshing dip were modestly worn with long dark stockings. A woman did not swim, she bathed. Not until the 20s, notes costume historian Claudia Kidwell, did social attitudes promote women to the same full use of water as men. It's inspired by the advanced ideas of Annette Kellerman, Gertrude Ederle, and other aquatic celebrities. When women did take up swimming, a brief functional swimsuit gradually came into vogue. Alert to a trend, one depilatory ad took notice that, quote, women who love swimming for the sake of sport find stockings a great hindrance to their enjoyment, end quote. The new craze for sunbathing, pursued with passionate interest on the Riviera by the smart set of international socialites in beachwear designed by Patou and Schiaparelli, had a trickle-down effect on brevity in and near the water. Unable to resist the tide, public beaches in the United States began to ease their long stocking regulations. At the decade's close, an abbreviated swimsuit with knitted trunks that barred the thigh had won popular acceptance and was being mass produced by the new ready to wear trade. Short dresses for streetwear and the national craze for dancing also encouraged a sleekly groomed leg. Abandoning her corset, the flapper rolled her stockings with a circular garter when she did the Charleston, cutely exposing a flash of bare knee. While the spunky flapper was perpetual grist for the Hollywood mill, the movie makers threw back at her a winning image of femininity that was even more daring, glamorous, and exciting in its cosmetic demands, or exacting in its cosmetic demands. Film historian Marjorie Rosen records that from 1920 to 1930, Hollywood memorialized the prancing, leggy chorus girl in more than 100 movies. There wasn't a trace of quote unquote superfluous hair in sight. With the unprecedented exposure given the feminine leg, the stocking trade went through a revolution of its own. At the turn of the century, when skirts touched the floor, 88% of women's hosiery had been woven of durable cotton typically embellished with clockwork, embroidery, lace insets, and colorful patterns. 11% of the market was in heavier, serviceable wool. A lasting image of the gay 90s remains the multiple white petticoats and the opaque striped stockings. Perishable silk in brilliant colors, which represented only 1% of all hosiery sales, was reserved for the upper class, for Sunday best, and for hussies. But with the vogue of short skirts and the popularization of bare legs at the beach, the stockings of choice in the 20s was silk, flesh colored, and as sheer as the looms could make it, to give the illusion of nudity in an impeccable, luxurious casing. By the end of the 20s, silk stockings in service weights and sheers had taken over the women's hosiery market. The silk stockings era the silk stocking era, with its dependence on Japanese imports, its symbolism of prosperity and glamour, even through the Great Depression, and its aggravating crooked seams and costly, frustrating holes and runs lasted until the shrewdly orchestrated introduction of nylon on May 15th, 1940, a date that is famous in hosiery annals for consumer mob scenes in the department stores and other retail outlets. After a wartime hiatus, when those without access to a black market supply were forced to make do with inferior rayon or leg paint and an eyebrow pencil seam, the triumphant reappearance of the nylon stocking at the nation's hosiery counters and on the feminine leg was welcomed with all attendant hoopla as one of the sweet fruits of peace. Although nylon was sheerer than silk and without imperfections of the natural fiber, the new technology did not resolve the problem of snags and runs, but it did eliminate the embarrassment of crooked lines up the back of the leg, with a seamless stocking that held shape through a couple of washings and was less prone to wrinkle at the ankles. Still, the subtle tyranny of the nylon stocking over the minds and actions of women for the next 20 years, until it was partially overthrown by the anti bourgeois fashion revolution of the 60s, should not be forgotten. Sheer, see through nylons were the only legwear that met the test of both sex appeal and conservative refinement in rain, snow, bitter cold, or brutally hot weather. Not only did their exquisite transparency serve to remind a woman that she needed to shave every couple of days in order to wear her stockings, but their fragility dictated a certain cautiousness and restricted movement that the girdle with garter tabs compounded. The illusion of satiny skin and impeccable chic that a pair of nylons engendered could be destroyed in an instant by an ugly snag, and stockings could snag on the most innocent of objects, such as an office desk. One could even have the depressing experience of seeing and feeling a run while putting on a new pair fresh from the box. The imposition of a special cosmetic vulnerability that did not exist in nature was the price that had to be paid for a pair of acceptable feminine legs.